I do want to get to the latest out of the Middle East right now, as Palestinian militants have carried out the deadliest single attack on Israeli forces since the Hamas attack that started this whole war. The Israel Defense Forces confirming that 21 of its soldiers were killed in that attack, and in all, over about 24 hours, at least 24 Israeli soldiers have died. Hours after that situation, the military said ground forces had encircled the southern city of Han Yunis, which is Gaza's second largest city, and this does mark a major advance by Israel. I want to bring in Alex Traiman, the Jerusalem bureau chief and CEO of Jewish News Syndicate. He joins us now live from Jerusalem with more on this and the other developments here. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. We appreciate it.
Josh, thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, first off, I do want to start by asking what we know about this attack that did kill 21 Israeli troops.
Well, Israeli troops were preparing demolitions of two adjacent buildings. There were two-story buildings inside the Gaza Strip, and Hamas terrorists fired an RPG at a tank that was defending and protecting the soldiers inside those buildings. And when the RPG hit the tank, somehow or another, the explosives that the IDF was planting inside those buildings for demolition exploded while the soldiers were inside the building. So they were collapsed inside the building that they were planning on demolishing.
And I know that Israel's defense minister had said the fighting in Han Yunis will intensify. Does that change at all with these soldier deaths?
No, quite the opposite. Israelis understand that war has deadly consequences, and the Israeli defense doesn't want the deaths of these soldiers to be in vain. Everybody understands that there could be losses, and yet when you look at the total losses on both sides, you know, Israel's lost 220 or so soldiers to date since this operation started, as compared to over 9,000 Hamas operatives.
There's been talk about some different deals over the past several months, and a recent report, several reports actually, indicating that there's a possible 2-month pause in that fighting in Gaza that would be part of a deal to exchange hostages and release the remaining more than 130 hostages that are being held in Gaza. Is that a real possibility to have a deal like that? Is that something that Israel and Hamas might both accept?
Well, it is reported that Israel has offered a 2-month cessation in hostilities in return for all of the hostages, and that is 108 live hostages, according to the estimates, and additional several dozen, 2 dozen or so dead bodies that are inside the Gaza Strip, for a total of over 130 hostages and bodies that were taken. And yet the reports are that Hamas has refused the deal because it did not call for a complete end to the entire military operation, only a cessation for 2 months, and it did not call for a complete Israeli withdrawal outside of the Gaza Strip.
I want to take a look at some of this video that we played just yesterday as the families of those hostages interrupted the meeting of the Knesset on Monday. Other families were camped outside Netanyahu's home. Are these families likely to influence any sort of decision for a hostage release deal?
Well, there's a lot of domestic pressure on the government to do everything possible in order to get the hostages back. And you can understand these families, it's their jobs to try to fight for their loved ones who were taken hostage by Hamas on October the 7th. And yet the government's in a very tough position because they obviously want to advance and succeed in accomplishing their war goals as quickly as possible. And yet there's pressure for them to cease the fighting in order to get the hostages back. I do think that the war cabinet and Benjamin Netanyahu understand that they need to go forward, and yet they have offered this deal, as we discussed. But of course, even though you see that the posters say bring them home, it's not the government that took the hostages, it's Hamas, and ultimately they're the ones that need to be releasing the hostages.
We heard again last week from Netanyahu, who said firmly there will not be a Palestinian state. Why is he holding so firm to that? Is that a surprise? And do you think there's anything that could potentially change his mind down the road?
Well, I don't think it's a surprise, and I think that Netanyahu's position represents basically close to 100% of the public here in Israel. You know, the whole formula for a two-state solution, Palestinian state, was called land for peace. That was the terminology given to this concept, but the Palestinians have proven over time that they have no peace to offer, and it cannot be that after the most barbaric attack on Israel since the foundation of the modern state, that the Palestinian Authority could be rewarded with a state, essentially turning land for peace into land for war.
A no confidence motion against Netanyahu failed. It only got about 18 votes in the Knesset. Does that say anything about Israel's overall view of Netanyahu and his leadership?
Well, definitely Israelis are going to want to understand who was responsible for the October 7th attack. And there was tremendous intelligence failing leading up to the attack, and also security failing on the day of the attack, where it took many, many hours for the IDF to respond. And everybody would have assumed that the IDF would have mobilized much quicker to prevent many more deaths, even if the border was breached the way it was. But that's going to take place during, and following a commission of inquiry after the war. Meanwhile, the war is going on, and there were many Israelis that wanted Netanyahu out way before this war started. And in fact, we had here 5 elections in 4 years, and there's bitter opposition to Netanyahu inside Israel. Of course, there's tremendous support, popular support for Netanyahu on the other side. So I think that what this no confidence motion, which failed by an overwhelming majority, it only got 18 votes supporting it out of the 120 inside the parliament, just demonstrates that the bitter political infighting that took place leading up to this conflict is seeping its way back into the public discourse.
And another big topic right now, U.S. and U.K. forces conducting strikes on more of those Houthi targets in Yemen Monday. Is any of that likely to deter the Houthis in any way?
Well, the U.S. and the U.K. have engaged in attacks, this time targeting specific military targets where the Houthis were planning on launching missiles and also weapons storage facilities. But the United States has said that these attacks are not meant to cause a further conflagration with the Houthis. And to this point, the Houthis have committed, close to 100 different attacks, firing missiles, including cruise missiles and ballistic missiles at Israel and at commercial vessels, and also at U.S. naval vessels inside the Red Sea. So we've yet to see that the Houthis have been deterred, and it doesn't necessarily seem like the United States and the UK are ready to continue these attacks if necessary. We have to see what happens. The Houthis are a terrorist organization. There's no indication they'll be deterred at this point.
Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to be here and to join us from Jerusalem and help break down some of the big headlines. Is there anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
Well, this is really a multi-front war here. People want to qualify this as an Israeli war against the Palestinians, but when you just mentioned the Houthis a moment ago, and you have Hamas fighting against Israel from the Gaza Strip, and you also have a very, very live and active fighting taking place between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. When you connect the dots between these 3 terror organizations, they all have the common thread of being funded and weaponized by Iran. And so this isn't really a war between Israel and Palestinians. This is a war between Israel and Iran and all of its terror proxies.
Alex, thank you again. Jerusalem Bureau Chief, CEO of Jewish News Syndicate. Again, thank you for taking the time to be here with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, I do want to get you back to this post on X right here. This is from earlier, and it is via the Israel War Room right there. Palestinian militants carrying out the deadliest single attack on Israeli forces since the Hamas attack that started the war. The Israel Defense Forces confirming that 21 of its soldiers were killed in the attack. And since then, the military said that ground forces had encircled the southern city of Han Yunis, which is Gaza's second largest city. And this does mark a major advance by Israel. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu mourning the soldiers killed when the blast from a rocket-propelled grenade triggered explosives they were laying. And Netanyahu telling the members of the media that Israel will press ahead until, quote, absolute victory is done against Hamas.